The door sealed in her face. Not by accident, not by mistake. Rin Solace had worked alongside those people for 2 years. She knew every face that turned away from the porthole as the evacuation shuttle lifted off. She knew the name of every person who did not pull her inside. She stood on the landing pad of Mining Station Dravk and watched the engine glow disappear into the white wall of the storm. Then, the storm hit her. The wind came in like a fist. Rin dropped to one knee immediately, not from weakness but from sense. She had read the briefings on Category 9 ice storms when she first arrived on Vorin. Standing upright in one was a fast way to become a projectile. She pulled her visor down, locked her jacket seal, and thought very clearly about the next 60 seconds instead of the next 60 years. She needed shelter. The station was already compromised. The structural warning alarms had been the reason for the evacuation. The walls were groaning. Going back inside was just choosing a slower way to die. But she had built things in this station for 2 years. She knew where the cracks were. Rin moved along the outer wall on hands and knees, keeping her body low and her mind running calculations. There was a thermal vent survey point 40 meters east of the landing pad. She had flagged it 3 months ago. A fracture in the glacier floor, warm air bleeding up from the volcanic network below. Management had ignored the report. Of course they had. She found it by feel in the whiteout. The warm air coming up through the crack was almost shocking against her face. The fracture was wider than her last survey reading. The glacier was still moving. She lowered herself in anyway. The drop was 4 meters. She hit the slope below and rolled, felt something crack in her ribs when she stopped against the cave wall, and lay still for a moment with the wind screaming somewhere far above her. Then the sound faded. The ice was thick here. The storm existed on another planet. Rin sat up slowly, cracked ribs. 2 fingers on her left hand were going white from frostbite. She had her toolkit, her emergency kit, half a ration bar she had been eating when the alarm sounded, and the multi-tool clipped to her belt that she had carried every day for 6 years because she did not trust a worksite that did not let her fix things herself. She told herself she was not going to die here. She meant it completely, without drama. The cave network below the glacier was warmer than the surface by 40 degrees. Not warm, but survivable. Rin moved carefully, testing the floor before each step. She had done underground survey work before. She understood how stone and ice behaved under pressure, where a ceiling would hold and where it was thinking about coming down. She found a deep alcove where 2 vent cracks met, warm air rising steadily, and built a simple heat trap out of her emergency foil sheet and 2 bent support rods from her kit. Basic thermodynamics: trap the warm air in a small space around your body. She ate half of what remained of her ration bar and told herself she was saving the rest for morning. She slept badly. Her ribs hurt every time she breathed. She dreamed about the door ceiling. On the second day, she went deeper. The cave network was larger than the survey maps had suggested. She moved through chambers of blue-white ice and black volcanic rock, following the warmth, looking for water, finding it eventually in a slow trickle where the vent heat was melting the glacier from beneath. She drank. She treated her frostbitten fingers with what little she had in the emergency kit and wrapped them tight. She was mapping the tunnels in her head out of habit. Engineer's habit. You always know how to get back out. She came around a corner into a wide chamber and stopped. It was large enough to be a cathedral. The ceiling rose into darkness. The floor was flat volcanic stone, dry and dark. 2 vent cracks ran along the far wall, filling the space with a faint, constant warmth. And in the center of the chamber, facing her, was the largest living thing Rin had ever seen. 6 limbs. 4 on the ground, 2 folded across its chest like arms, or like weapons. Shoulders as wide as a pressurized door. Fur the color of ash and iron, matted and scarred. Eyes that caught the light from the vents and held it, pale gold and very still. A gray wolf. She had seen pictures. Every worker on Vorin was shown pictures on day 1 and told very clearly that if they ever encountered one in the field, no protocol applied. No protocol had ever been needed. No one who encountered a gray wolf in the wild had survived to need one. Rin did not run. Running triggered pursuit. She knew that from the briefings. She also knew that she could not outrun this thing in a cave tunnel with cracked ribs. She stood completely still and breathed through her nose, slow and even, and looked at the animal that was going to kill her. It looked back. It did not move. 1 second. 5. 30. The gray wolf lowered its massive head slightly and sniffed the air in her direction. Then it sat down, all 6 limbs settling, weight shifting, enormous body becoming still. It watched her. Rin watched it back. Neither of them moved for a very long time. An hour passed. Maybe more. Rin had stopped counting after the first 30 minutes. Her legs ached from standing still. Her ribs reminded her they were cracked every time she drew a slow breath. The gray wolf had not moved except to blink once, slow and deliberate, like something that had all the time in the world because nothing had ever threatened it. She started thinking, because that was what she did when she was scared. She stopped feeling and started thinking. The beast was enormous, older than anything she had read about in field reports. The scars on its face were deep and layered, some pale with age, some newer. There was a weight to how it sat, not laziness, permanence. Then she saw the leg, left foreleg, lower joint. The fur there was matted dark, not the gray iron of the rest of its coat. The leg was held just slightly off the ground, not enough to be obvious from a distance. Just enough that an engineer who had spent 2 years reading structural stress in things that were about to fail would notice. Something was wrong with that leg, something ongoing, something painful. Rin looked at her multi-tool. She looked at the leg. She looked at the pale gold eyes watching her from across the chamber. This was possibly the worst idea she had ever had. She had once repressurized a failing transit tube from the outside during a microcrack event, which her supervisor had called suicidal, and which she had called a geometry problem. This was worse than that. She moved slowly, 1 step, then a pause, then another. Then she kept her hands visible, both of them out from her sides, tool in her right hand held flat so the beast could see it was small. She watched the ears. She watched the weight distribution on those 6 limbs. She watched for any shift that meant it had decided to stop waiting. It watched her come. When she was close enough she could smell the animal heat coming off its fur. She crouched down, slowly, made herself smaller. She could see the wound clearly now, a splinter of metal. Mining equipment, she recognized the alloy, dark gray industrial casing, was buried deep in the joint, old. The flesh around it had tried to close and failed, infected over a long time. She set her multi-tool to its narrowest grip and looked at the leg, then at the eyes 1 more time. The eyes blinked, slow, waiting. Rin worked. It took 4 minutes. The beast held still through the whole process, tensing twice when she first touched the wound and when she worked the splinter loose, but holding each time with a self-control she understood. She cleaned the wound with antiseptic, knowing it would sting, and wrapped it with her last medical strip. She sat back on her heels and looked at what she had done. The gray wolf lifted its forelegs slowly, turned it, studied it with those pale eyes. Then it set it down on the floor, and the leg held flat, and even for the first time. It looked at her. She looked at it. She said quietly, "You're welcome." They shared the cave that night. Rin built her heat trap in the alcove nearest the far vent. The beast settled in the center of the chamber the way it had been when she arrived, except now the bad leg was extended and resting. She ate the last of her ration bar and thought about what she was going to eat tomorrow. By morning she had her answer. Something dead lay at the entrance to the alcove. Frozen prey, small and dense, something that lived in the cave network. She did not know the species. She cooked it over the vent crack with a flat rock and the heat and ate it because she had no other options, and it was surprisingly fine. This became the pattern. He hunted. She built. She repaired the alcove ceiling where a stress fracture was threatening to drop ice on them both. She mapped the tunnels and found a second water source. She figured out which vent cracks were stable and which ones fluctuated and moved their sleeping areas accordingly. He kept other things out of the chambers they used. She heard them sometimes, other creatures, and then silence. She never saw them leave. On the 5th day, she called him Vor. It meant nothing. She needed something to call him that was not it, because it did not fit anymore. He did not respond to the name. He also did not stop watching her with those pale eyes that seemed to be consistently, quietly deciding something about her. She was in the main chamber, reinforcing a weak section of the wall with flat stones and wet mineral deposit that would freeze solid and hold, when she heard a sound from the upper tunnel. Not an animal sound. Footsteps, deliberate, careful. Something moving on 2 legs and trying to be quiet about it. Vor's head came up. He did not move toward the sound. He looked at it. Then he looked at Rin. Then back at the tunnel entrance. A figure appeared at the top of the drop, holding a faint blue light source, wearing the layered ice gear of the veil. Tall, lean, the long angular face of a young one. His pale eyes swept the chamber and landed on Rin. Then they moved to Vor. Then back to Rin. He made a sound in his language that she did not speak but understood completely. It was the sound of someone whose entire understanding of the world had just been challenged by something it had no category for. Vor looked at him and did not move. That was the part, Rin would learn later, that should have been impossible. The young Veil's name was Dial. He was a scout for Pack Icefang, one of the oldest packs on Voron's northern glacier shelf. He had been tracking Vor's movements for 2 weeks, because a gray wolf that old and that large shifting its territory was considered a significant threat event. He had followed the trail down into the thermal vents expecting to find a den or a kill site. He had not expected to find a human woman living there. He had especially not expected to find her living there with the gray wolf watching her the way a pack watches one of its own. Getting Rin to Pack Icefang took most of a day. Dial spoke Broken Trade Common, the interplanetary pidgin language that human workers used with alien species across the mining sector. Rin spoke it fluently. They communicated in careful pieces on the walk up through the ice tunnels toward the surface and the pack settlement carved into the glacier wall 2 kilometers east of the station ruins. Dial told her about Bond Right. It was old law. The original Veil had come to Voron as a species that lived alongside the Grey Wolves rather than despite them. They had not tamed the beasts. No one had ever tamed a Grey Wolf. But in the ancient days there were rare, strange events. A Veil who survived a Grey Wolf's territory, who the beast chose to leave alive and eventually keep. Those individuals were considered marked, protected under the Grey Wolf's claim. To harm them was to challenge the beast itself. This law had not been invoked in 4 generations. It had never been invoked for a non-Vael. Elder Sura was waiting when they arrived. She was small the way glaciers are small, compacted, dense, holding enormous force in a quiet form. She looked at Rin for a long time without speaking. Then she spoke to Dale in fast Veil language that Rin could not follow. Dale answered carefully. Sura's expression did not change. She turned and went inside. Rin was given a room, not a cell. A room with a heated vent and a sleeping surface and a bowl of food she did not fully recognize but ate without complaint. She was also given a clear message through Diel that Elder Sura had not accepted anything yet, and that Rin's status in Pack Icefang was currently nothing. The tests started the next morning. Sura had designed them for failure. Not obviously, she was too careful for that, but Rin understood the structure of a loaded test. She had taken enough of them in the engineering certification process back on Earth, designed by committees who had decided in advance who should not pass. The first test was crossing an unstable ice shelf above a 40-meter drop. Rin crossed it by reading the stress lines in the ice visually, finding the load-bearing structure the way she read any floor plan. She was slower than a Veil would have been. She made it. The second test was structural. A fracture in the pack's outer glacier wall. They gave her the problem expecting her to fail without Veil tools or knowledge. She redirected the load around the fracture instead of trying to fix it, the way an engineer works when they cannot remove a problem. It held. The Veil builder watching her said something to Dale that translated as, she understood what the wall was trying to do. The third test was an overnight outside on the ice. Minimal kit. Rin built a survival shelter in 40 minutes using the convection principle from the thermal cave. She was cold. Her ribs still hurt. She did not come back early. At the end of it, Sura stood in front of her and said something long and sharp in Vael. Dael translated quietly. She says you pass with no grace and no strength, and she does not understand what you are. But bond right law does not ask for grace or strength. It asks if you survived the territory. You survived the territory. Rin said, I'll take it. Sura made a sound that was not a laugh but was not nothing either. That evening, Vor appeared at the edge of the pack's outer boundary. He sat in the ice field and looked at the settlement the way he had looked at Rin in the cave on the first night, still and permanent, and deciding something. The Vale sentries saw him and did not approach. You did not approach a gray wolf that was not moving toward you. That was one of the first things Vale children learned. Dael stood beside Rin at the wall, and they looked at Vor together. He came every night while you were being tested, Dael said. He came to the edge and watched, and then left before dawn. Rin did not say anything. That also has not happened in 4 generations, Dael said. She was formally acknowledged under bond right before the pack's full assembly that evening. Elder Sura said the words with her jaw tight and her eyes level. Every Vael in the hall heard it. The law was spoken. Rin Solace, human, was under the claim of the gray wolf called Vor, and Pack Icefang would recognize that claim. It was the first time a non-Vial had ever stood in that hall and been named by ancient law. Rin stood straight and her ribs hurt, and she thought, now she had somewhere to stand. The next part was finding out who had taken it from her in the first place. 3 weeks after her acknowledgement, a consortium ship came down through the cloud cover and landed on the storm-cleared pad near the ruins of Station Drafk. Rin watched it from the glacier wall through a scope Dale had lent her. She recognized the hull markings. Interstellar Mining Consortium, Security Division. Not a rescue vessel. Rescue vessels were white. This one was gray. She had been busy in those 3 weeks. Dael had a relay drone he had salvaged from a supply crash 6 months before the evacuation. It still had partial function, not enough to broadcast off-world, but enough to access the local consortium communication network if you were patient and knew what you were looking for. Rin was patient. She knew exactly what she was looking for. It had taken her 8 days of careful work on the drone's damaged systems to get access, then 2 more days to read what she found without reacting. The mineral survey she had filed 3 months before her abandonment had been flagged internally by the consortium's extraction planning office. Her numbers showed a deposit concentration under the eastern glacier shelf that was 6 times larger than the official reported figures. She had noted the discrepancy and asked for a review. The request had been received, marked urgent, and then quietly buried. 14 days later, a work order appeared in the internal system, reassigning her crew to a different station zone, placing her in the section of Station Dravk furthest from the evacuation routes. The evacuation protocol for that section had been quietly removed from the emergency database 2 days before the storm. It was not an accident. It was a filing. Someone had deleted her exit and left her in the building. The man who came off the gray ship was named Koss. Rin knew of him by reputation. A warden, which was the consortium's word for someone who fixed problems that the legal department could not fix cleanly. He was large, organized, and had 4 security personnel with him wearing hard suit gear rated for ice environments. He went first to what remained of Station Dravk. Then, getting nothing there, came toward Pack Icefang. Elder Sura received him in the outer hall with Dael standing to her left and 2 senior warriors at the door. Rin was not present. She was 2 rooms back, listening through the gap in the wall where the old heating conduit ran. Koss was polite. He was the kind of polite that was actually pressure-wearing manners as a coat. He explained that he was conducting a welfare search for a missing consortium employee, one Rin Solace, whose psychological stability after extended isolation was a matter of concern to the company. He used the word welfare 4 times. He never used the word liability. Sura told him that there was no missing consortium employee in Pack Icefang's territory. There was a member of the pack living under bond right law, and that individual was under Vael territorial protection. Consortium jurisdiction did not extend into Vael Pack territory under the Interplanetary Settlement Agreement, which had been signed by the consortium's own legal office 11 years prior. Koss smiled. He said he was sure there was a reasonable way to handle this. Sura said there was. He could leave. He left. But he set his team up in a camp at the base of the glacier approach, 300 meters from the pack's outer boundary. Just far enough to say he was not trespassing. Close enough to say something else entirely. That evening, Rin and Del sat in the relay room and she finished what she had been building since she found the files. A full evidence package, survey data, internal communications, the altered evacuation protocol, the work reassignment order, timestamps on everything. It was clean. It was complete. She had done technical documentation for 8 years. She knew how to build a file that held. She needed a channel to get it out. The relay drone was not strong enough. Koss's ship had a deep-range transmitter that absolutely was. Dale looked at the evidence package on the small screen and then looked at her. You want to use his equipment to destroy him. I want to use his equipment to file a legal report with the Interplanetary Labor Tribunal, Rin said. What it does to him afterward is the tribunal's concern. He has 4 security personnel in hard suit gear. I know. You have a multi-tool and cracked ribs. They are mostly healed, she said. And I have the cave network, and I have the station maps, and I have been down in those tunnels for 3 weeks. Koss's people have been on Vorin for 11 hours. She paused. I also have Vor. Del was quiet for a moment. You cannot ask a Grey Wolf to fight for you. I'm not going to ask him to fight anyone, Rin said. I'm going to go into the tunnels. He goes where he wants. He has gone where I go since the day I pulled that splinter out of his leg. I am not responsible for what a wild animal decides to do in its own territory. Dael looked at her for a long time. Then he said, The eastern vent access is 40 meters outside Koss's camp perimeter, on the blind side of the ridge. She looked at him. I'm just telling you what I know about the terrain, he said carefully. I am a scout. It is my job. Rin closed the evidence file, clipped her multi-tool to her belt, and checked the charge on her visor light. Koss had 4 people in hard suit gear and a ship with a transmitter and 11 hours of experience on a death world. She had been here 2 years. The night was long on Vorin. She had time. She went into the tunnels 2 hours before midnight. The vent access Dael had described was exactly where he said. A flat crack in the glacier rock, just wide enough to move through sideways, hidden behind a natural ice ridge that put it completely out of Koss's camp sight lines. Rin moved through it without her visor light on until she was 30 meters inside, and then lit it on its lowest setting. She had been mapping these tunnels for 3 weeks. She did not need the map anymore. She had the layout in her head the way she kept building plans, not memorized like a list, but understood like a structure. She knew where the weight sat, where the space opened, where the ice was thick, and where it was thin. She was not going to attack anyone. She had thought about this clearly and without anger, which was the only way she trusted herself to think about something that mattered. Koss had 4 armed people in military-grade suits. She had no weapon except understanding, so she would use that. The thermal vent network ran beneath and around the entire base of the glacier. Some of those vents connected directly to the surface through stress fractures. Some of those fractures were old enough to be stable. Some were not. The consortium had been drilling in this area for 4 years. She had been on site for 2. She had read every geological report filed in that time, and she had written half of them herself. She knew exactly which fractures the drilling had made worse. She found the first one 90 minutes into the tunnels, a wide stress fracture in the ceiling directly beneath Koss's camp. She removed a specific wedge of ice from the lower edge, one piece, carefully chosen, the structural equivalent of pulling a pin already under pressure. She moved away fast. The fracture opened slowly. Not a collapse, a settling. It changed the sound the ground made under the camp perimeter. She heard the reaction from the surface, voices, scrambling. Koss's people moving off the unstable ground. She was already at the second point. 2 hours of careful work. She found 4 more structural weak points she had cataloged over weeks. She did not destroy anything. She opened existing fractures already under tension, separating Koss's team from each other by removing ground connections between sections of the surface approach. Not a battlefield. A maze that was already there. She just opened the doors. Rin surfaced through a third vent behind the ridge east of the station ruins, 12 meters from where Koss's ship sat on the landing pad. Two of his security team were visible, moving carefully on ground that had become unreliable. One was radioing for position checks and getting static. The ice movement had sheared the relay they had set up. From their movements, they were not sure what was happening. It felt geological. It felt like Vorin being Vorin, which was exactly what she needed. Vor was at the eastern ridge. She had not called him. He did not follow instructions. He had simply, as Dale had predicted, gone where she went. He stood at the ridgeline in the gray Vorin night, visible against the ice, and Koss's two visible team members went very still when they saw him. A gray wolf, that large, that old, standing between them and their only egress point. They did not move toward it. That was Vorin's survival training working correctly. Rin walked to the ship. The door was locked with a consortium security code. She had it from the relay drone files. Internal credentials were stored in the same system as everything else because whoever designed their security had been overconfident and underpaid. She was inside in 90 seconds. The deep-range transmitter was exactly where it should be on a ship of this class. She had the evidence package on a data chip she had built from the drone's spare storage. She plugged it in. She set the transmission to the Interplanetary Labor Tribunal's open broadcast channel, the one required by interplanetary settlement law to accept emergency submissions from any source, encrypted or not. She added a location tag, a timestamp, and her full legal name. She hit send, confirmed. She walked back out, and Koss was standing at the base of the ramp. He was alone. His team was scattered across a glacier that had rearranged itself under them. His radio had been cutting out for an hour. He was, for the first time, looking at Vorin as the place it actually was, instead of a location on a work order. He looked at Rin, then past her at the ship, then at the transmission indicator light still running on the hull panel. He understood. Rin said, "The tribunal received it 13 seconds ago. The copy they keep in their receiving buffer cannot be recalled by anyone, including me." Koss looked at her. His jaw was tight. Behind him, at the ridge, Vor had not moved. Koss looked at the gray wolf for a long moment. Then he looked back at the woman who had been left to die on his orders, who had spent 6 weeks building something out of nothing in a cave, who had come out of the ice in the middle of the night and used his own transmitter to end him. He did not say anything. Rin said, "Pac Icefang is going to hold you under territorial violation law until the tribunal sends a representative. Elder Sura's decision. You brought armed personnel into a buffer zone, a treaty violation that has nothing to do with me." She walked past him toward the glacier. Vor moved from the ridge, following her the way he always did. Slow, enormous, permanent. The transmission indicator on the ship hull kept blinking green until it was done. The tribunal representative arrived on Vorin 19 days later. Her name was Arbitrator Fen, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had spent 30 years processing labor violations across 12 star systems. She had read Rin's file on the transit in. When she stepped off the shuttle and saw the glacier settlement and the Vial at the outer wall and the massive scarred gray wolf visible at the eastern ridge, she stopped briefly, then kept walking. She sat across from Rin in Pac Icefang's outer hall and opened a data pad. "You are aware," Fen said, "that your evidence package is being described by Consortium Legal as fabricated." "I know," Rin said. "The original survey data has my authorship signature at the molecular encoding level. It cannot be forged retroactively. The deletion logs have timestamps. The evacuation protocol removal has 2 consortium IP addresses attached to it. I have the names of both employees who made the changes. I included them in the package." Fen looked at her for a moment. "You did all this from a salvaged relay drone. It still had the access credentials in its memory buffer. The consortium's IT security was inadequate." "That is," Fen said slowly, "an extremely polite way to describe what you did." Koss had been held in Pac Icefang's outer rooms for 19 days, which he had spent in visible discomfort, and which Elder Sura had permitted with a quiet and absolute satisfaction. His team had been released 3 days in, after they confirmed to Fen's advance representative that yes, they had been in the buffer zone, and yes, they had been armed, and no, they could not produce authorization for either. The consortium settled before Fen had been on the planet for 48 hours. These things moved fast when the evidence was clean and the legal exposure was large. There was a document. There were numbers. Fen presented it to Rin and gave her time to read. Rin read it twice. "I want 3 changes," she said. Fen looked up. "The mineral rights for the Eastern Glacier Shelf go to Pack Icefang directly, not to an escrow fund, not administered through a third party. To the Pack, with Vale's signatories controlling the account." Fen wrote that down. Every human labor contract operating under consortium authority on a Class 4 hostile world has to include a guaranteed individual evacuation right. Not a crew evacuation right. Individual, not contingent on supervisor approval. Fen wrote that down without expression, and the 2 employees who deleted the evacuation protocol are named in the settlement as personally liable, not the company covering for them. Them, individually. Fen looked at her. "That last point is unusual." "Someone made a choice," Rin said. "I want that visible." Fen wrote it down. The final settlement was signed the next morning. The individual evacuation guarantee would require renegotiation of contracts across 47 active consortium sites. The mineral rights transfer to Pack Icefang represented resources that would make the Pack independent for the next generation. The 2 named individuals faced personal liability proceedings. Elder Sura attended the signing in full Pack formal dress, layered ice white and deep gray. She signed where the territory acknowledgement required it, then looked at Rin. She said something in Vile. Long, measured. Del translated. "She says you argued like a Pack Alpha, not with threats, with preparation. She says she still does not know what you are. She says that is no longer a problem, because she knows what you do. She says Vorin made you. She can work with something Vorin made." Rin looked at Sura. "Tell her that is one of the best things anyone has ever said to me." Sura heard the tone if not the words. Something in her face shifted. Not warmth exactly. Recognition. Arbitrator Fen offered Rin full passage off Vorin as part of the settlement. Medical care, rehabilitation, resettlement. Rin declined. "You have grounds to never work in hostile environment labor again," Fen said. "I'm not labor anymore. Pack Icefang needs an engineering consultant for the mineral operations. I know this glacier better than anyone alive." Fen looked at the ice walls, the veil watching quietly, the glacier visible outside the open door. "All right," she said simply. Diel sponsored the residency application that afternoon with the ease of someone who had decided weeks ago and was only completing the paperwork. That evening, Rin walked to the eastern ridge. The Vorin sky was doing something extraordinary. The polar light event the Veil called Ice Dawn, when light through the upper glacier mist turned everything purple and pale gold for 20 minutes. She had seen it twice, and both times been too cold and too busy to look. She looked now. Vor came out of the cave entrance 30 meters behind her and settled onto the rock beside the ridge. Not behind her. Beside. The way something sits when it is not following you, but is simply choosing to be in the same place. The light moved across the ice in long, slow waves of color. Rin had been left to die on this planet by people who thought she was something they could throw away. She had spent 6 weeks in the ice and come out the other side with a gray wolf, an alien family, a legal precedent, and mineral rights. She thought about all the things that had tried to kill her on Vorin, the storm, the fall, the wound in her fingers, the warden, the cold. None of it had worked. Maybe the planet had stopped trying. Maybe it had decided to see what she did next instead. The ice dawn lasted 20 minutes and then faded, and the long Vorin night came in dark and absolute and full of things that did not care if you survived. Rin went back inside. She had work tomorrow. Work.